this conversation is choosing an all-win world. Choosing a world that works for all. And that one sentence is pretty easy to say. And how do we pour our energy and our moments and our years and our activities and our careers and our communities into that ideal of choosing an all-win world? And I'd like to spend this period unpacking that a little bit. I want to start with perhaps one of my favorite words: politics. It's very common when I ask the question, what does the word politics mean to you? You get a long, predictable list of hypocrisy, deceit, ulterior motives, selfishness, greed, vying for power, etc., etc., etc. And when you look at the government, you see all those things. And so it's natural that those connotations have attached themselves to the word like barnacles on a ship. But that's not what politics is. Politics comes from the Greek word polis, which means city, or my city, or the place that I call home. And it's that willingness to step up, to take a risk, to put yourself out there, to steward the place that you call home, to care for the relationships and the people in that place that you call home, and the commons, the natural world. And to step off of your own farm or your own orchard to be able to lend to the collective action, the collective organizing, such that the place that you call home can be as beautiful as possible. And that through some action, through some leadership, through some organizing, there's something that you can do to protect the beauty of that world for the future generations and potentially even improve it. That's politics. And so when we say that this is a political party, this is a party. This is a celebration of those who feel the profundity of that political calling to rise up above our own lives in order to look out into our communities, into our cities, into our regions and states and nation, and into our planet. And say, I'm willing to do something. I'm willing to take my unique risk in order to lend towards the betterment of this place that I call home. There's another word that carries a similar profundity to me, and it's the word inheritance. And of course, traditionally used, typically used, some amount of assets that a parent has that passes on to their children. And that's an important inheritance. And I also want to expand that thinking further. So when we look out at this natural world, that we see to some degree that's our inheritance. And when we look at the industries that we have created, energy, media and entertainment, the infrastructure. That's our inheritance. The people that built that bridge or paid for that bridge are gone or going to be gone soon. So that bridge is our inheritance. And one of the things that's probably least considered when we think of inheritance is government. Right? The city of Nevada City, I don't know very much about Nevada City, but the city itself, the systems, the structures, the administrative capacities, that was built, that was created, that was invented by our ancestors as their best ability to steward this place. And those people who founded and created this place called Nevada City, they're probably not here anymore. So it's ours to step up. How do we pick up where they left off? The state of California. That's a whole big mechanism. It's built. And it's our inheritance. And the country of the United States of America as American citizens. The systems of taxation, the militaries, the police forces, the infrastructure, that's our inheritance. And so one of the most important things about capital P politics is being prepared to inherit well, to being oriented and understanding responsibly all the things that are coming down the pipeline, to be an inheritor of, and to be positioned to stand up and say, yes, I'm ready for the responsibility of leading what becomes of the current media industry. I'm ready for the responsibility of what becomes of the current energy industries. And I'm ready for playing a role in what becomes of these things called governments, municipalities, states, nations, and international organizations and agreements. So that's really the heart of being able to choose an all-win world, is that we fully accept the world as it is and as it's being handed by life to us. Hearing your shares around what gives you a sense of pain, that deep pain, right? I heard things like the dying of our oceans, the extincting of our species, subjugation of people, systemic subjugation of people in all shapes and forms. And when I hear the visions of what's possible, of what you want, and what other people want as they answer that question, and then as I look at the current political narrative, I see the current political narrative held in a band that's able to go so deep into the shadow and so high into the possibility, but it's narrow. And where we went down here with talking about the depth of the problem, and we went up here with the possibility and the potential of heaven on earth. So our range is greater than the current political narrative. Okay, so how do we meet that? How do we crack that conversation open so we can participate in the conversation of what matters to us as a society right now that's adequate, not slipping in to the conversation as it's been framed by the existing political entertainment industry. And that's a lot of where this conversation on OneNation comes in, is cracking that conversation open wider. So we can actually legitimize and open up these topics of deeper aspects of pain, the extinction of species, the rates of suicide, the experience of addiction at all levels in our society, modern day slavery. There's a long list of real deep, dark issues. And we don't find those represented. And so our stand is to say yes to cracking that wider open. And when we look at these solutions that are coming up through some of the conversations of universal basic income or other types of reparations or other types of innovative, quote unquote, progressive ideas, they don't lend the depth of the transformation that I would consider to be anywhere in the realm of adequate. The depth of the transformation that would really lend to us shifting the direction from a potential dystopic future to more of a utopic future is a greater depth of systemic transformation than the current political narrative is able to entertain. And that's what this conversation is bringing the conversation of heaven on earth into a political context. So we demand a greater level of creativity, a greater level of synergy, a greater level of vision as we engage our society in building a future comparable to the world that our hearts know is possible. When I was in my early 20s, and my whole life really, I've been devoted to creating a world that works for everybody. I grew up quite religious, and so heaven on earth was like a part of my religious background. And after I kind of left behind the more rigid structures of religion that I grew up in, I didn't leave that behind. I was like, I'll leave behind religion, but I'm not going to leave behind this vision of the world working for everybody. I can leave behind the idea of like golden roads, like the roads paved in gold. I can let that go. But I don't choose to let go of a world that actually feels like individual sovereignty and agency is totally, is systemically enabled and encouraged. A world where we all are able to choose the life we want to experience. And so I looked at the whole world and I was like, all right, there's all these international problems, there's poverty. So I studied international security and conflict resolution. And then I started an international nonprofit doing poverty alleviation work in Africa, and I was devoted to that for several years. And as I started to better understand the geopolitical systems that drive our world, I had this really gnarly awakening because I thought extreme poverty was just people that hadn't caught up yet. They hadn't developed yet. And so if we can just help them develop and catch up, then we'll all be good. Because, America's great. So we've kind of figured out how to do the thing good, and they just haven't figured that out yet. That was what I was thinking in my early 20s. Lo and behold, the geopolitical system was actually generating poverty. Extreme poverty was an output of the system, the economic, political, societal system. And lo and behold, for someone who was raised in a Republican household, believing for sure that America was like the best thing that's ever happened to this world, I came to realize that in fact we were a major driver and actor of those geopolitical systems that were creating some horrendous outcomes in the world at a social and ecological level. And so it was that moment when I looked at the work that I was doing and the work that thousands and thousands of do-gooders were doing in all different shapes and facets, and I just saw them hacking at the leaves of the issue. And every day they come back and there's more leaves because the system was producing all the suffering that these nonprofits were trying to kind of catch and manage each day. So, okay, great. I'm going to spend my life going into the heart, going into the system. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I was going to figure it out or I was going to die trying. But I wanted to spend my life at the roots. And fortunately, I've had some really wonderful mentors that have helped me understand exactly what that could entail. And what I started to realize after various years of striving to better understand this is that while our political systems and our governmental systems kind of drive the policy and have the monopoly on the legal use of violence that can then enforce policy, that is actually the economic system that's stronger than the political system. And so no change at the political level would hold, because the economic model will always pull the political model into its preferences and its alignments. However, when you look at the economic model, you realize that there's no change that could be made at the economic level. You can't just invent a for-benefit business model or roll out some new blockchain technology that's going to increase accountability, although all these things are very meaningful. Because what rests deeper than the economic model is our culture. It's who we are. It's what we value. It's how we think. It's what we prioritize. It's how we make meaning of the world. And at the center of this cultural conversation has been identified that there's a switch. It's a switch that we can flip. And it's a switch that goes back very deep into our genetics and into our history. And it's what we call the win-lose culture. And that win-lose culture is that part of us, part of all of us that lives within us, that lives within our nervous systems, that is trying to assess who's the us and who's the them. And is willing to dehumanize the them in service to the us. And as tribes, that made a lot of sense. And as civilizations with other civilizations that are armies, that if we didn't have a stronger army, they would kill us. That made a lot of sense. And it's actually an adaptive, critical survival strategy to be able to dehumanize some in order to protect the boundary that's the us. But it turns out that this propensity that has served us is actually coming to a moment in time as we're cresting this part of the anthropological story of coming to a planetary species where the win-lose is now driving a lose-lose. Because that win-lose is driving the potential use of nuclear weapons and the use of economic systems that are annihilating the commons and threatening life on Earth. The potential that AI gets programmed with the same win-lose culture is pretty much one of the worst things we could imagine. And the list goes on and on and on. So there's this evolutionary contextual pressure for us to move beyond the win-lose. The good news is we have this other cultural program called All Win, where we want everybody to be taken care of. We want everybody to win. We just apply that culture to those that we've defined as us. So whoever the us is, we do the all win thing too. And whoever the them is, we do the win-lose thing too. And we sit at a moment in time to use the sheer adaptive capacity of the human nervous system to be able to flip that cultural switch within ourselves and within each other as a community, and to model to the rest of the world what that looks like, to be a living embodiment of all-win culture, all-win paradigm, and an all-win way of being, which means that we've brought everyone and everything into the domain of what we call us. And that is the center of our feet before us. Because when everybody and everything is in that us category, then we run businesses in a different way. We run our media industry and our energy industry. We run our families and our communities. We run our personal relationships, and we'll run our governments different. I'm not here to say that the government isn't full of these deep, systemic, incumbent, corrupt power systems. I'm not saying that. I'm not naive to say, oh, if we just elect a new person, then all of a sudden all of our problems will go away. what I'll say is it's our inheritance, right? Millennials are the voting majority, right? We are rising and we will occupy the entire world. It will be our inheritance as we move forward. So we get to choose how we program it as we occupy it. So that's what we're talking about, right? A multi-decade arc, a multi-decade commitment to combine our own individual transformation with the stitching together of a transformational social network, with the systemic transformation of every aspect of society, including government, and reprogramming the whole thing with the all-win culture. And we've been looking and analyzing a little bit more at what are the core capacities that bring your leadership, your all-win leadership forward. And the 4 things we have identified is, number 1, that you know yourself and that you know how to distinguish between the ways that you've been manipulated and the ways you've manipulated yourself, the way that you've bought into bullshit and the way that you've created your own bullshit, and how to find your own individual, clean, sovereign perspective based upon your experiences that you can actually bring your voice and your leadership forward. Right? That's kind of step 1, is know yourself, find your sovereignty. All right. Thank you for calling us in. And I'm going to pick up where I left off, right? Yes. So the 4 key attributes that really empower us as all-win leaders are, number 1, to know yourself. And number 2, once you've known yourself and known your own perspective, to be able to set it aside. Right? And those that have studied integral theory and other theories of cognitive development, this moment in time where we undergo massive cognitive transformation and cognitive expansion is when we start to be able to take multiple perspectives. We can set our perspective aside and see something from multiple perspectives. And the more people that we allow into the us group, the more perspectives we're willing to see through. And any time that we've predetermined any perspective to be inferior or inadequate or stupid or evil, we're inside that win-lose. And as we move into that all-win, we say every perspective is relevant. Every perspective has something valid. And like an elephant in the dark with a flashlight, everyone's seeing a part of that. And it takes us stitching together all of our different perspectives to have a holistic understanding of anything. You think you know the truth about the abortion issue? You know a perspective of the abortion issue. And there's others. You think you know the truth of the immigration issue or the military-industrial complex issue? Any of the issues that we're certain we know the answer to. We know what's right and what's wrong. We know a part of it. And it's having the humility of saying, I want to see this from multiple perspectives that brings the all-win leadership forward and starts to include more people into the group of us. The third capacity of all-win leadership is what we call holistic consideration, which emerges naturally because the more perspectives you take on any particular topic, the more information you have. And you start to increase your understanding of any particular domain. You start to become surprised by information that comes in from other perspectives. And you start to be able to be a more legitimate leader on that topic. Not because you have the strongest opinion or because you can assert that opinion the strongest, but because you legitimately have more information on the topic because of the more perspectives you've taken in. And that leads to being able to invent all-win solutions. A solution that is an octave above where the win-lose discourse is. Because through taking multiple perspectives and through holistic consideration and having more information on a particular topic, then you understand what the genuine fears are in the various stakeholders. And you understand what the genuine desires are in the various stakeholders. And now you don't have to operate at the level of the you can actually take all of that as fodder to invent something that's never even been considered before. You actually bring the conversation to an unprecedented territory and find a place where we can reconcile what matters to everybody. And then experiment with those all-win solutions. So these are the core facets of leadership of the all-win way of being that we are suggesting that if that can move deeper into community, if it moved deeper into business, if it can move deeper into politics, then that is the central mechanism of enabling the systemic transformation of all sectors at all scales that we need. So OneNation Party USA is a network of people that are ready to cultivate their own capacity of all-win leadership and use that cultivation to influence and improve everything that you touch, and use the coherence of a greater quantity of people with a greater depth of relationship and trust and connection to create an attractor field, to create a gravity that makes all-win leadership cool. That then actually allows us to move our media from a media that reinforces a win-lose narrative, a win-lose paradigm, and actually use media that reinforces an all-win paradigm. And use all the different aspects of influence that we have as we're inheriting the existing reality in order to exhibit and model a new way. And every day that goes by, there's more people entering into that all-win consciousness on their own, of their own accord. And we're not here to say we're going to make people all-win leaders. We're here to say who's inspired by all-win leadership, who's already been getting that urge to consider the totality of humanity and the totality of nature in that which you care about stewarding. And how can we come together and become better at doing that? How can we become stronger and more powerful together? How can we bring our codes together and our visions of the blueprint of the future and weave those together synergistically in order to emerge the mystery of where we go from here as a humanity? So OneNation is a container to hold thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions who are devoted to their own all-win leadership in choosing an all-win world. And we're organized as a political party, not just a club or a group or an online forum, so that simultaneously, as we change ourselves and as we change all that we are influencing, that we're simultaneously becoming the mayors and becoming the governors and becoming the city councils and the state representatives and the national representatives. Not because we're taking so seriously the government as it is. I think we all know that it's ripe for massive transformative disruption. But it is how it is as it is right now. And maybe kind of like Neo to Agent Smith at the end of The Matrix, we can realize that despite being told that the agents are unbeatable, that all you can do is run from them, like Neo's comrades told him in the movie, that we can actually stop and ask that question for ourselves. Is it really something worth being aversive of, being aloof from, separating as other, as, oh, that's the dense stuff, oh, that's the stuff, or that's the rat's nest of systemic corrupt motivations. There's nothing we can do about that, right? In the story, that's how Neo was taught to relate to the agents. But he stopped and he thought for himself. And if you're familiar with that scene at the very end, he stops running and he turns around and he stops fighting. And it's a computer program, so he can do stuff like this. He just enters into Agent Smith and splinters him into life from the inside out. And so that, to me, is the noblest and most honorable way of relating to our inheritance of the government, is that we inherit it well and that we lean in proactively. And OneNation Party USA is forming ballot access so that every election, there's a line item for every city council member, for every mayor, for us to be able to put our nominee forward and to establish a new sense of credibility and legitimacy, that the people that are most credible and legitimate to lead our city is the people that best embody the all-win leadership characteristics. And to establish those norms and to build those voter bases and to organize politically around that, those principles, to be able to build that platform, to build that brand, right? When 40% of Americans are registering as independents, not all of them are registered independents because they have a philosophical ideal of not being a part of a collective. It's not why they're independent. They're not anti-collective. They're anti the options of collective organizing that are offered. It's 40% of America. Right? We have a raising generation of millennials and iGen who are just kind of like to the whole thing. And they haven't been showed and modeled something new that's possible. So as an emerging political party collective, we have the possibility of drafting in millions of Americans that have been waiting and looking for sanity, looking for wisdom, looking, is there anywhere where love and power have come together? And I believe that we can say, this is where love and power come together. And then we can wave that flag as big and bold as we possibly can and say, if you're interested in systemic transformation, if you're interested in choosing an all-win world, if you're interested in seeing what it would look like for a leader with the power of a general and the love of a mother with a newborn baby to come together and see what that would look like when love and power come together, that's what's going on here. Do you think that there's some people that are ready for that conversation, that are looking for that conversation, that are craving a conversation where our spiritual ideals or our futuristic ideals can meet grounded, tangible, scaling organization? Inside of the party, we are helping individuals, and we're beginning the process of helping individuals create all-win relationships with themselves, because we're our own kind of collective, if you know what I mean, to create all-win relationships with other individuals in their lives, loved ones, children, parents, to create all-win relationships as communities, to be able to provide leadership into business world from an all-win standpoint, and also to be trained to become the all-win elected officials of the future. We believe deeply in the power of cities, and we are planning currently a 2022 national mayoral campaign. And right now we're looking for who is ready to step up. Like, there's a lot of people with this deep passion for leadership, and you look around the world and a lot of people think the only way to do that is to kind of like start your own company or found your own land-based project or kind of create your own cryptocurrency or something like that. But there's these other things that already exist called cities, and they need leadership. And so not everybody needs to create their own thing in order to actually find something that has the magnitude of the vision they have for themselves to be able to know where that can root. And our intention is to inspire a renaissance of civic engagement. For people to say, wow, I want to bring my leadership into my city, into my home. There's $1 billion annual budget there. There's hundreds of employees. There's massive administrative capacity. What can we do at an ecological regeneration level with our city? How can we help the human healing, the trauma healing? How can we help to be able to experiment with new forms of agriculture, new forms of social organizing with our city? And so we're leading and running this national 2022 mayoral campaign, and we'd like to have dozens or hundreds even of mayoral candidates lighting up ballots across the country with a new organizing voter bloc and new organizing systems and structures and chapters able to actually do the work of getting those mayors elected. And the good news is we don't even need somebody to be elected, because the campaign itself will initiate thousands of people into the city, into that all-win way of thinking. So the campaign process is the PR campaign of the future. You get it? It's that every time we say, let's organize for an election, what we're really saying is let's initiate the people around us into a more profound way of thinking about stewarding our society. And we just stick at it every election cycle, and we start to have a greater concentration of all-win leaders inside of our government and massive quantities of all-win leaders outside of government. And together, not picketing outside of City Hall or outside of Congress, but just becoming Congress and becoming City Hall, we then can begin to invent the future. We are rolling out a national campaign we call the All-Win campaign, or Choosing an All-Win World, in 2020, in order to put ourselves on the political stage in 2020 while the entire country and the entire world is thinking about American politics. So when they're asking the question, is there wisdom and sanity out there, that they'll be able to see something new. And we would love, we have a vision of ending 2020 with at least 1 million members in OneNation. And then beginning to just stir that pot, and if life is going to require a kind of grueling, slow on-ramp, then we're willing to do that. Onesies and twosies, singles and doubles, and start to build that momentum that way. And there's a lot of us that believe that there's some kind of phase change of consciousness that's on its way. There's some tipping point. There's some, and if that's real, then maybe we could have kind of some quantum scale of this network and actually do it big and bold and fast and true. And we hold the possibility of that quantum outcome as well.